Hey, it's Luke and welcome back to the Churchfront channel. In today's video, I'm gonna walk you through how to install and set up one of our new favorite tools for doing virtual sound check. Now, if you're unfamiliar with virtual sound check is a tool and a capability that is in a lot of today's modern digital mixers that allows you to record your band live through the console inputs into a DAW. And then when the band is gone and you're looking to train your volunteers or maybe to get a more fine-tuned, detailed control of a certain channel or a problem spot you might be having with a certain input source, you can come back, replay the tracks from the DAW as if you had a live band on stage, but it's all virtual, coming back into your console and actually use the console's built-in channel processing to make adjustments, dialing in EQs, compression, effects, and then getting it really dialed in for your next upcoming service. So let's dive in. So here I am on this Storyline Students iMac, and this is just your basic kind of run-of-the-mill M1 chip. It's got 16 gigs of RAM, but with this DAW, you're not gonna really have to worry about RAM or speccing out this machine because really all it's doing is capturing the audio. So it's not doing really any processing. It's almost acting as just a hard drive for you to store your tracks in. So we're gonna type in the Waveform website and you're gonna be led to this Traction website right here. So Waveform free digital audio workstation. So on this website, you're gonna be able to see overview of the DAW. We're gonna go to the free download section and we're gonna enter our information. Now, I already have an account, so I'm gonna go ahead and get logged in on my end, but if you are brand new, you're gonna enter your email address here, first and last name, make sure that you're not a robot, and then it'll send you a verification email. So once you get logged in and you've verified your email, you've logged in on the Traction website, you'll want to go to My Account and then to My Downloads, and you're going to scroll down and go ahead and download Waveform 12. I'm on a Mac, so I'm downloading the Mac version, but as you can see, they also have a PC and a Linux version as well. Once I've downloaded it, you're going to be guided through the installer. Once the installation is successful, you can go ahead and close out of the installer, move to your trash bin, and now when I launch Waveform, you should have the application up and running. It's going to guide you through some of the initial prompts. Click OK if you want to help improve it. We don't need to necessarily scan for plugins, but you can if you want, if you're going to be using this as a dedicated recording platform. So go ahead and log in with your Traction account so that you can verify the use of this product. The nice thing about Waveform is that it is actually completely free. We're not going to be upsold or limited in time like you are with an Ableton trial. So Waveform with the free version is actually completely free for, ever. Now, Waveform does have a pro version and some expansions, but as you can see, looking at this, the majority of what you're gonna get with a $99 version of Waveform is instruments and samples. And so for the purpose of using it for virtual sound check, you're really not gonna use virtual instruments or samples or drum samplers or micro samplers or MIDI or audio effects. This is literally going to be a recording destination that you're literally just gonna play back. You're not gonna really do any processing in the DAW. So here is a little tour of the interface. We've got the Waveform app open on this computer. And it's gonna have a little prompt to kind of set things up here. So you can either follow these steps or you can just exit out of here. Now, one of the first things you'll notice is that it's pretty clean, it's pretty minimal, and I love it. So you work in kind of a tab view from left to right up here. And so on the welcome page, you're seeing all of these options, your recent edits, you've got your project templates, your color scheme, your audio settings, and then your newsfeed and training videos. Now, I would recommend if you're just getting started with a DAW for the first time, you could do this video right here, the Waveform 12 Quick Start Guide, free and pro. This is a great little video and it will just walk you through kind of a general overview of the DAW itself. But if you're familiar with DAWs, it's not going to take you super long to get up and running. So what I'll do is I'll actually set this as my Dante virtual sound card output, and I'll use the Dante virtual sound card as my input. And I'm gonna make sure that my sample rate matches the sample rate on my SQ6 console over here, and my buffer size is great at 512 for recording. So I can do a lot of things down here. I can click on settings and kind of get deeper in the weeds, but I kind of work from left to right. So when I click on projects in this tab view, it's going to show me kind of my active projects, my library projects up here, and then anything I'm currently working on is going to be in this middle section. All my settings are going to be in this third tab. And so again, this is kind of appearance stuff and basic like any other software that you would have. So one of the things that I'll need to do here, as you can see, is that I only have 2 outputs and 2 inputs right now. And even though I'm using Dante Virtual Sound Card, it's only set for 2 in, 2 out. So let's go ahead and change that. So I'm going to open up Dante Virtual Sound Card. You can see that it's 2 by 2 right now. So I'm going to go ahead and stop it. And I'm going to change it to 32 by 32. On the SQ6, I have 32 channels of USB over the USB interface. Now, depending on what Dante expansion card you have in your console, you might have more than 32 channels, but I'm going to set up Dante Virtual Sound Card on the iMac for 32 channels, and I'm going to route 32 channels from the SQ console here today. So if you're using Dante, you're going to want to make sure that you've patched in Dante Controller from your expansion card in your console into whatever computer you're routing your audio into. Now, if you're using the built-in USB audio interface, you'll do that all within Waveform itself. But because I'm using the Dante expansion card from the SQ and Dante Virtual Sound Card in the computer to send and receive audio, I've got to make sure that it's patched to send 32 channels from the sound card in here into the computer. Okay, so now that I'm into my settings in my audio devices, I've got Dante Virtual Sound Card set up as my output and my input. The first thing you're going to need to do is activate or enable all these channels. So you can see that by default, it's output 1 and 2 and input 1 and 2 are the ones that are active. And actually, before I get going too far, you can probably tell it's already pretty annoying, and it's just kind of a beginner's guide setup when you first install the software, that this pop-up window is all over the place. So wherever you move, this pop-up window is showing you different things. And so I'm going to deactivate that. So I'm going to go over into my project that I've created, the Churchfront test project. I'm going to come down to this little arrow in the bottom left-hand corner, and I'm going to click on this help bar. And then I'm going to click on pop-up help and come up to enable pop-up help. And all you need to do is select it, and that check will go away. And so now when you're moving about the interface, you're not getting that annoying pop-up window, and I can close that out. So let me show you how I enable these tracks, and then we'll set up a test project. So you can go ahead and just click on the disabled section to enable these outputs. And you're going to do this for every single one that you have. And you're going to notice they're paired right now, and we're going to go back through and uncheck down at the bottom, treat as stereo pair, so that you actually have individual outputs coming from the computer as multi-tracks back into your console when it comes time to mix. One of the things I would love to see them do is kind of a multi-select of all channels and be able to edit multiple parameters like that stereo pair select all at once, so that you could just select all your outputs, uncheck that box, and you'd be up and running. But I kind of understand why they have it that way. And again, you only have to set this up once for you to save your template, and then you're done with it. So I'm gonna go ahead and keep going. Now that you see I've got individual 32 outputs ready to send back into the console, I'm gonna go down and enable my inputs, and they don't set these up as stereo pairs. So I'm able to just enable these tracks and be off to the races. Again, a multi-select here or like a Command-All function would be great, but again, you only have to do this once. Okay, so now I've got all my inputs and outputs. Now, one of the things that you can do in here is, let's say I want to select my output. I can actually come in here and rename this output, and I'm going to do that according to our show file. One of the ways that I would recommend going about this process is making sure you stay organized from the get-go. So on the computer, when you're setting up Waveform, you have the ability to name your channels down here on your outputs and on your inputs. You can actually set your label, or what Waveform calls your alias. And so you can name your channels kick in, kick out, snare top, snare bottom, that kind of thing, so that when you're looking at your DAW and when your tracks are coming in, they're all labeled appropriately. So one of the things you need to do is to make sure that you're sending those inputs out your sound card into the computer appropriately. So I'm gonna do that here on my SQ right now and get my channels ready to go so they're coming into the computer correctly. So now that I've got my channels that are normally on stage, my input sources like my kick drum, my bass, my electric, my piano, my vocals, I've got them all coming into the console, and then I've patched them as outputs out the Dante expansion card to go into the computer. I can now go ahead and label them appropriately. So when I come into my inputs, I'm gonna go ahead and label these down near alias. So I'm just gonna go ahead and look at my patch list on my touchscreen here on my SQ6, but you could also use something like the SQ mix pad on your computer. If your computer and your console are on the same network, you could just pull up the channel names on the offline editor if you'd like. So I'm gonna start here and I'll speed up this process for sake of this video. Now that we've got our inputs labeled correctly on our settings, and if we go back into our settings, you can see if I click on input 1, it's labeled kick down here under my alias. And so I know everything's labeled correctly. I can go now to this plus button and click new project. And I'm gonna call this Storyline Students Test. And I'm not gonna use a template right now because I'm actually gonna end up saving my own template when it comes down to it. So I'm gonna go ahead and create the project. And you can see that it creates just a regular DAW, kind of a project file that is ready to go. Before we continue with the video, a brief word from our sponsor, Worship Ministry School. If you consider yourself a non-tech oriented person and you're enjoying these step-by-step videos so that you cover every step of setting up your worship tech, then you should check out Worship Ministry School, where there are dozens of courses just like this. We break down the fundamentals of audio, video, broadcast, automation, and so much more step by step. So whether you're honing in a new skill as a staff member, or maybe you're a volunteer who wants to skip the headache of trying to figure out your worship tech by yourself, these courses are for you. To get access to our growing course library, check out worshipministryschool.com/apply or use the link in the description below to schedule a free strategy session with a coach today. Now, back to the video. So right now, I'm gonna go ahead and clean this up a little bit and set it up to be ready to record for whenever my band gets here. So first thing you'll notice is that on the left-hand side, this kind of resembles Ableton. So if you are in the Ableton world, even the Logic world a little bit, your kind of instruments and your samples are all kind of on the left side at some level. Your library, your tracks, all that kind of stuff is over here on the left-hand side. I'm not gonna use that when I'm recording, so I'm gonna go ahead and click this small X over here. And then I'm gonna go ahead and kind of clean up some of these other things. So I don't necessarily need a tempo track because I'm not gonna be referencing that tempo, at least for virtual sound check purposes. They're gonna be playing to a click, and so I don't really need to see that. So I'm gonna go ahead and uncheck. I'm gonna just right click on or command click on the tempo section here and click on show tempo track. I'm also gonna do that for the master track because I don't really need that. Now, I use markers throughout the service as a front of house engineer to kind of track where those songs are starting and stopping. So I recommend, marking these so that you can easily at a glance see what song started and stopped where throughout your recording. But if you just want to keep one track the whole time and really not have that kind of organizational detail, more power to you. And you can do the same thing and uncheck this here. So to add more tracks than 8, you're just gonna use this little plus button here on the screen and click add several tracks. So if I use the 14 tracks, I'm gonna get a total of 22 tracks. So I need 10 more tracks to get my total 32 patched into Waveform. So I'm gonna go ahead and add several tracks, click 10 tracks, and now I'm in great shape. So Waveform is kind of unique in how your mouse and or trackpad interacts with the user interface. So I would recommend sitting down, kind of feeling out what your specific setup does in order to control the view here. For me, if I need to scroll up and down these tracks, I want to hover over the track view to scroll up to get to where I want to go. If I'm over the tracks themselves, the wavelengths and the actual recorded tracks, then I'm zooming in and out. If I'm using this Apple Magic Mouse, I'm using kind of the scroll function with my one finger, and you can see here that I'm zooming in and out. So that's a pretty cool experience, and I can also compress the tracks, make them smaller by selecting all and getting them all into one smooth view. So now that I've got my tracks in a great view, I can go ahead and I'm gonna click in this little window up here and click my input. So for track 1, my input is kick. So I'm just gonna go down the list and make sure that everything is patched accordingly. And if I were to expand these a little bit, you'd be able to see the labels as well. So I'll do that so that you guys can see that. Okay, so now I've got all my inputs routed into the inputs of the actual tracks here in Waveform. Now you can see on mine that I've got a couple spare inputs, like on track 21 and 22. I'm not really using those right now on the board. I'm kind of the philosophy that I'm gonna go ahead and patch it so that it's ready to go, so that if for some reason I add an instrument or an extra channel, somebody happens to bring in a keytar on the service day, I can easily patch that in not only to the console, but also into my virtual Soundcheck recording software. So you might not use 22 and 23 or your spare channels, but I would go ahead and patch them so that you're ready to move forward in the future. Now you can also go through the process, if you'd like, to rename the actual tracks. So I am going to do that because I want to be organized from the get-go. And again, this does take some time in the beginning stages, but once you do it, you're really set for using this template week in and week out, especially if you're programming and patching more channels than you actually use on a regular basis. That way you're ready for whatever the band throws at you, and you'll know that you'll have a good recording of it to reference later. So I'm just right-clicking on these tracks and clicking Rename Track. Okay, now all of my tracks are actually named on this file. So they're named as my input sources in the audio input settings, but then they're also named within this specific file according to my routing. So now I want to test to make sure that Waveform is actually seeing an input that I'm sending into the computer. So I'm going to go ahead and use this handheld one, and handheld one is right here, and you might hear that in the PA in this room. And I'm going to go over to my handheld one channel in Waveform, which is down towards the bottom. And you can see right here that I'm getting great signal here into the DAW. And so if I were to click this red button to record, it would be armed to record, and then I can hit the key command R, or I can come down to the middle of the DAW and click this red button. So I'll click the key command R right now. And now everything I'm saying, you can automatically see the wavelength starting to populate here in Waveform. So it's going to start recording that, and it'll have that as a sample, and then I'll click the spacebar to stop. And so we've confirmed that we're getting signal from an input into the SQ console, and it's sending appropriately into the right channel into the DAW. And so let's go ahead now and work on patching the outputs so that your Waveform DAW can send those tracks back in through the console for you to play back and edit to your heart's content and make sure everything sounds perfect for your services. Now it's time to route Waveform's channels as outputs back into your digital mixer. And this is where it can kind of get confusing, and I'd recommend that you save a scene of your local inputs, making sure that you've got kind of live inputs coming into the console appropriately. So I'll show you how to do that now. So before we go about routing virtual inputs from Waveform to the console as our main inputs, I want to make sure I save a library preset for how I've got my inputs configured right now. So my SQ6 here in Storyline Students is set up to use a combination of S-Link and Dante as our inputs. And so I'm going to go ahead and save that by going to the library button. And then I'm going to go to User, and I'm going to Store New. And I'm going to call this Live Inputs. Click OK. So now I've got my Store New Live Inputs scene saved. Now I'm going to go to my I/O page, and I'm going to change those inputs to be coming in over Dante Virtual Soundcard. I'm just going to go 1-to-1, same thing as I did for my original output patching. Okay, so now I've got all 32 channels patched as inputs coming from my Dante Virtual Soundcard in my computer. I'm going to save that and call this Storyline Virtual Soundcheck. So now I've got my inputs there. Now I need to route that in Dante Controller so that it's also going to and from the right places. So let's go ahead and do that now. So I want to encourage you again to make sure that you're saving presets everywhere you're going. If you are using Dante Virtual Soundcard and you're using Dante Controller to route your audio to and from, make sure you have a Dante preset saved with all your configurations for live audio. But if you're using USB audio, again, this can be much simpler because it's really just routing it in Waveform and routing it in the console over USB. So I'm just going to take these inputs from my computer and transmit them to the Allen & Heath SQ6. And now that means that whatever is recorded in my computer, when I play it back, is going to go into the inputs on the SQ6 as a channel, and I can then process and use it for playback, and I can train volunteers, and I can get them to experience what it's like to tweak and turn knobs and compressor settings and EQ bands and really hear the differences without a live band needing to be present. Let's go ahead and show you how to route your outputs within Waveform, and it's going to be super similar to the previous experience. So I'm going to go ahead and go back into my settings. And when I come to my outputs, I have the same options here for what I'm going to do in terms of labeling the alias. So I'm going to click on output 1, and I'm going to label it kick. I'm going to go down my list of outputs and speed up this process as well. So now I've got all my outputs labeled in my audio preferences. So that way when I pull them up in my output settings of each channel in Waveform, they're gonna be labeled appropriately and easy for me to navigate. So in order to route an output, you're gonna come over here to the right-hand side and click this little speaker icon, and you'll click that, and now you'll see all of my outputs here. So I'm gonna go ahead and just label these. And it's, same process as before, just on the right-hand side, tom 1, tom 2, overhead left, overhead right. And it should be coordinating with the tracks on the left as well. Awesome. So now I've got all of my inputs labeled and routed coming into the board, named as the channels on the board, and saved in Waveform. And then I've also routed all of my outputs from Waveform back into the console, and I've saved a preset for that routing configuration so that if I need to go back to my local inputs for a live recording, they're all set to be actual live inputs coming into the board for services, flowing into Waveform to be recorded. And then when I'm ready to do a virtual sound check, I can hit my library preset, load up my virtual inputs from Dante virtual sound card on this computer, maybe it's USB audio on your computer, and now I'm ready to play back. So let's see if we were successful and did everything correctly. Keep in mind, I do not have this microphone on. I'm not gonna be speaking into it. But right now, I'm gonna go ahead and play back this recording I did earlier on this microphone that I recorded into Waveform, and I'm gonna play it back through output 27, which will be coming into the channel for Vocal 1 handheld on the SQ console. So that's channel 27 virtually. Now I should be able to play it back and control it and edit it. So let's see if I did everything right. And now everything I'm saying, you can automatically see the wavelength starting to populate here in Waveform. So it's gonna start recording that, and it'll have that as a sample, and then I'll click the spacebar to stop. So we can see that we were successful. We've already routed all of the audio correctly. Now it's playing back through the board correctly. And now I want to show you, if you were to do this with a band or with a recording of your band, and you wanted to hone in on a section, Waveform makes it pretty easy to do so. So it's got these little bars up here in the top left that are blue, and you would drag them out, and these are kind of your start and stop markers. So if you start here and you stop over here, you can actually loop audio. So just like any other DAW, if you were to loop some audio, it will just continue to replay and replay and replay until you tell it to stop. The way that we're gonna do that is we're gonna come down to the center section, and there's a little circle here with a couple arrows that is kind of the loop function. So we're gonna activate that, and you'll see that now this section became a little bit more bold, a little bit more black, has some more contrast, and these blue bars now have a consistent flow of blue in between them. So now what happens when we play them is it's going to loop back and back and back to the beginning so that we can continue to listen to the audio that we've recorded. And now everything I'm saying, you can automatically see the wavelength starting to populate here in Waveform. So it's gonna start recording that, and it'll have that as a sample, and then I'll click the spacebar to stop. And now everything I'm saying, you can automatically see the wavelength starting to populate here in Waveforms. So if you are not new to Virtual Soundcheck, then this is no surprise or shocker to you, but I hope that if you are new to Virtual Soundcheck, it is starting to open up your mind to some of the amazing possibilities that you can do. Not only can you play back the audio that you've recorded from your services, but now when I go over to my console, when I start to want to adjust that channel, I can listen back to a section of the kick drum and just solo up that kick drum and fine tune the EQ and tweak the compressor settings. And I can really dive into processing each channel to get more refinement on my mix. This is such a helpful tool when training volunteers because I can invite them into the building or into the space when there's not a band present and really let them tweak and kind of turn knobs and really hear what an EQ band does, teach them the seek and destroy method without it being destructive to a live band environment. If we were to be doing all those things live, it has a potential to really mess with in-ear monitors and really sound bad in your PA because you're troubleshooting or you might be learning on the fly. So having a virtual soundcheck infrastructure is so helpful when it comes to not only refining your mix, but also training your volunteers. So last but not least, I really want to teach you how to save your Waveform project file as a template so you can load it up every single time, ready to go, ready to record your services so that you can play them back at a later date. So once you've got things labeled the way that you want, it's routed in your audio settings the way that you want, you can save a template. Now keep in mind, there's a lot more customization that you could do. You could recolor all these channels, you could make folder stacks so that they're nice and organized. But for the sake of this video, I just wanted to show you all of the channels coming in and all the channels going out and how to go through that process. So once you've dialed that in and you're where you want it to be, you can come down to this little arrow. You can click File, and then you can click Save Edit as Template. And once I click Save Edit as Template, I'm gonna give the name for a template, Storyline Students Virtual Soundcheck, and this is the template to record a service for virtual soundcheck later. And then you can go ahead and click OK. So now when I come to my plus button up here, I can do New Project, and I can come down to Template, and I can open up Storyline Students Virtual Soundcheck. And then I can click Create Prod. I'm gonna name this a new one, Test Version 2. I'm gonna click Create Project, and now all of my channels, all of my routing is all done, it's all saved there, and my vocal track that I recorded earlier is not there because I didn't check that clips box. And just a heads up, although you might not see the same names here in the routing, if you do scroll down, you'll see the same names as you put in earlier. So if we go up to 1 for percussion right, you'll see it even though it's not on this little speaker icon as it was before. So don't be alarmed if you thought you lost all of your information. It's still there, it's just hiding. So that is how to get up and running with Waveform, a brand new DAW on the market that you can use to implement virtual soundcheck in your ministry context. Virtual soundcheck is a great way to not only hone in on your mix and refine problem spots, but also to train volunteers and maximize people's time when you don't have to have a physical band present. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you found value in it, if this was helpful, go ahead and hit the like button down below, and don't forget to hit subscribe as well so you don't miss out on future videos on this channel. Until next time, my name's Luke, and I'll catch you then.